the first and most important commandment is this: you must be willing to be unremarkable for as long as your chosen field requires, because mastery is not visible until very late, and most of the men who claim mastery don't have it. In the last episode, we talked about prudence, phronesis, the eye of the soul, the practical wisdom that sees clearly what a particular situation actually needs. I said that prudence is the charioteer of the virtues, the driver, the virtue that supplies the direction when courage supplies the energy. And I said at the end of that episode that prudence, when it has been integrated into a man's character, has a corresponding archetypal expression, what Robert Moore, following Jung, calls the magician. Now, let me deal with the name problem before we go any further. I'm aware that for many of you, the word magician sounds wrong. It sounds occult, like Harry Potter, or like David Copperfield with a sequined assistant. For some of you, it sounds vaguely New Agey, and you're ready to switch off this episode and wait until next week. I understand. Moore's choice of terms is frankly not the choice I would have made. But the archetype he names is real. So bear with me through the first couple of minutes of this episode, and I'll tell you what the magician actually is. If you're still uncomfortable with the word at the end, fine. Call him whatever you want. The sage, the master, the mentor, the knower. The label matters less than the reality. And the reality is what we're after. The magician, in Moore's account, is the archetype of the knowing mind in the service of others. He is the man who has gained genuine mastery over some domain. A body of knowledge, a craft, a tradition, a way of seeing, and who deploys that mastery for the good of the people around him. Notice the elements. Genuine mastery, not pretense, not credentials without competence, nor the appearance of expertise. Of some domain, particular, concrete, and defined, a circumscribed field with real edges, and 3, in the service of others, not for his own status, not for the pleasure of being the man who knows, but for the actual good of actual people who need what he sees. So, who is he? He's the surgeon who, after 30 years of operating, can read a scan in 15 seconds and tell you what 3 less experienced doctors missed. He's the master carpenter who walks onto a job site, checks the framing in a glance, and can tell the foreman exactly which corner is going to cause a problem 8 months down the road. He's the priest who is set with enough dying men that he can walk into the hospice room and know, without being told, what kind of conversation this one needs. He's the teacher who can read the 8 faces in a classroom and knows which student is following, which one is faking, and which one is about to break through. He's the wise older man in any field whose presence in a room changes what's possible because he sees what no one else sees. That's the magician, the man of practical wisdom, embodied and applied to a particular field, deployed in the service of a particular community. And let me say what the magician is not, because the cultural counterfeits are several. The magician is not a guy with credentials. A degree is not mastery, neither is a title nor a certificate. Plenty of credentialed men have very little magician in them, because they have never put in the years of attention and failure and recovery that actually forge knowledge into wisdom. And plenty of men with very few credentials have the magician energy in spades because they've done the work in whatever field they were given. The magician ain't a guru. The man who claims to know everything about everything is not a magician. That's a salesman. The mature magician is, almost without exception, narrow in his field rather than a jack of all trades. He knows his field. He is appropriately humble about everything outside of it. And the guru is the inverse, appropriately humble about nothing, pretending to know everything. And the magician is certainly not an influencer. The man whose mastery has the appearance of mastery, the man whose entire output is the performance of expertise without the underlying competence. Yeah, the influencer is the most contemporary counterfeit, and he's everywhere. The example that comes most readily to my mind is the skinny 20-year-old fitness influencer with abs on TikTok selling workout programs. The magician's authority comes from what he can actually do. The influencer's authority comes from how many people believe he can do it. 3 marks distinguish the mature magician. I'll name them and then I'll develop each one. First, mastery, the slow, unglamorous accumulation of competence in a real field. Second, discernment, the capacity to see in a particular situation what general principles can't tell you. And third, transmission, the willingness to spend his mastery in the formation of others. So, first up, mastery. The mature magician has paid for what he knows. He's put in the 10,000 hours or the 20,000 or the 50,000. He's made the mistakes. He's had the failures. He's sat under teachers and submitted to traditions that were larger than he was. He's done the long, boring, unspectacular work of becoming actually good at something in a culture that consistently rewards the appearance of being good at something over the reality of it. And this is exactly why the magician has become rare in our day. The economy of attention does not reward mastery. It rewards visibility. So the men who could become magicians very often abandon the path partway through because the optical awards arrive long before the actual competence does, and too many men can't resist the optical rewards. If you want to become a magician in any domain, the first and most important commandment is this: you must be willing to be unremarkable for as long as your chosen field requires, because mastery is not visible until very late, and most of the men who claim mastery don't have it. The second mark, discernment. This is where prudence and the magician most obviously coincide. The mature magician can do something his less formed colleagues can't. He can see what this particular case actually requires, beyond what the general rules would tell him. The textbook says one thing, the man in front of him is a particular man and the textbook doesn't know that. The protocol says one thing. This situation has features the protocol doesn't account for. The standard answer is one thing. The real answer for this person in this moment is something the standard answer cannot give. Aristotle saw this clearly. Phronesis, he said, is the virtue concerned with particulars, not with universals. You can have all the universal knowledge in the world and still fail in the particular case because the particular case has features that no universal description can capture. The magician is the man whose long mastery has given him an eye for the particular. He sees what's in front of him, not what the rule says should be in front of him. That's what makes him useful. The third mark, and this is the one that distinguishes the mature magician from every shadow form, transmission. The mature magician is willing to spend his mastery in the formation of others. He teaches, he mentors, he apprentices the next generation into what he has learned. He generously gives away what cost him so dearly to gain. And let me put this as bluntly as I can. The man who has gained genuine mastery and refuses to transmit it is not a magician. He's a hoarder. He's sitting on capital that was given to him through a tradition by men who themselves spent their lives developing it and then handed it on to him, and he's keeping it for himself, either because his ego is fed by being the only one who knows, or because he's afraid that giving it away will somehow diminish him. Both motives are corruptions. Both are forms of the shadow magician, and we'll come to that in a moment. The mature magician understands that what he has been given is not his property. It is a deposit, something held in trust that's meant to be passed on. The whole point of the long, costly formation he underwent is that the next generation should not have to pay quite as much to acquire it as he did. That's what tradition is for. That's what mentorship is for. That's what the relationship between teacher and student has always been for. And the man who refuses that role, who has mastery and will not transmit it, has failed the archetype, however impressive his individual competence might be. Now, as in the warrior episode, the magician has 2 shadow forms, bipolar shadow forms, in Moore's phrase, a shadow of excess and a shadow of deficiency. The active shadow and the passive shadow. The two poles, two ways to fail, and most men who go wrong with this archetype go wrong by swinging between them depending on the situation. Moore's names are the Manipulator and the Detached Magician. Sometimes he'll call him the Denying Innocent. I'll use his terms with my own gloss. The Manipulator is the active shadow. He's the man whose mastery has come unmoored from service and is now being deployed for his own advantage, and often against the very people he was supposed to be helping. He uses what he knows to take from people rather than to give to them. He's the doctor who's more interested in the prestige of the diagnosis than in the welfare of the patient. He's the financial advisor whose recommendations are quietly shaped by his commissions. He's the consultant whose advice is calibrated to keep the client dependent on him rather than making the client capable. He's the priest, God help us, who uses his knowledge of his parishioners' inner lives as leverage rather than as care. He's the trainer who knows enough to be useful, but uses his knowledge to keep clients hooked rather than letting them graduate out of needing him. The manipulator is everywhere in the modern economy, frankly, because the modern economy rewards the manipulator's posture. Mastery is used for the extraction of value rather than for the formation of others. It's the dominant business model in a great many professional fields, including, regrettably, coaching and pastoral ministry. The manipulator shadow is one of the great pastoral problems of our age, and I include myself among the men who has to watch out for it constantly. That's one pole. Here's the other. The detached magician is the passive shadow. He's the man who has the mastery, but is cut it off from the world. He knows, but he doesn't act. He sees, but he doesn't speak. He's the brilliant academic who watches his colleagues make obvious mistakes and doesn't say anything, because engaging with them would be beneath him. He's the senior man in the parish or in the firm who has stopped mentoring the younger men because mentoring is hard and being the smart cynic in the back of the room is easy. He's the gifted man who has retreated into private connoisseurship, wine, books, music, ideas, and doesn't give to anyone what he could be giving. He often presents this detachment as wisdom. He calls it humility. He calls it not wanting to impose. He calls it picking his battles. In fact, what he's picking is comfort. He has the gift and he has decided not to spend it like the man who buried his talent in the ground. And he has constructed an elaborate rationalization for why this is instead a virtue. Moore's alternative name for this shadow, the denying innocent, captures it well. The man who, in the face of what he can see and could act on, denies that he has any responsibility, pretends to be the bystander that he really isn't. Innocent, in the most morally loaded sense of that word, innocent of having engaged. Two poles. The manipulator uses his mastery to extract. The detached magician refuses to use his mastery at all. And, as with the warrior shadow forms, most men who go wrong with this archetype have a dominant pole and a recessive pole and switch between them depending on the cost. So, same diagnostic question as last time. Don't treat the manipulator and the detached magician as descriptions of other men. They're descriptions of you in one or the other pole on most days. If you're a man who's gained real competence in your field, and many of the men listening to this show are, your dominant shadow is probably the manipulator. The version of you that knows how to use what you know to get what you want. The version that has discovered that competence is a kind of leverage. The version that, even when you don't fully intend it, sets up your relationship so that the people around you stay dependent on what only you can provide. And your recessive shadow, the one that comes out when the cost of engagement gets too high, is probably the detached magician, the version that withdraws, the version that watches the younger man make the obvious mistake and says nothing, the version that is retreated into private mastery and tells himself a story about not being needed. If you're more of a reserved man, temperamentally inclined to watch rather than to teach, to read rather than to speak, your dominant shadow may be the reverse. The detached magician most days. The man whose competence is genuine, but who keeps it largely to himself, and who tells himself that this is humility. And when you do step forward, when you finally engage, your recessive shadow comes out as the manipulator. The years of held-back mastery, when finally deployed, comes out shaped by the resentment of having been ignored for so long, and the giving becomes a kind of taking. Both poles are in you. The question, as always, is just which one is in the driver's seat most days, and which one is in the back seat waiting. 2 things for you this week. First, name your dominant magician shadow. Manipulator or detached? Pick the one that fits how you most often go wrong with what you actually know and call it by its name. Second, identify one younger man in your life, younger in years or younger in your field or younger in some specific domain where you have genuine mastery, to whom you could be transmitting something you know and have not been. One man, one thing you know. One concrete way you could begin to spend your mastery on his formation this week. It could be a conversation or an invitation or a specific piece of teaching, maybe opening a door for him that he couldn't open for himself. Transmission is the active ingredient that breaks both shadow forms. The manipulator cannot manipulate the man he is genuinely giving to because transmission is by its very nature a gift. And the detached magician can't stay detached if he's actually showing up for an apprentice. Both shadows dissolve in the same medicine. Before the next episode, the sentence to finish. The mastery I have been given that I have not been transmitting is... The mastery I have been given that I have not been transmitting is... Don't name the impressive thing, name the true thing. The actual competence you actually have, however unspectacular it might sound when you say it out loud, that you have been keeping to yourself, that someone in your life could be receiving from you, that you have not been giving. That's where magician work begins. Next episode, moderation, the third cardinal virtue, the discipline of rightly ordered desire, and the most misunderstood of the 4, often confused with prudery, or confused with deprivation, or confused with the joyless management of appetite, and one of the most important. With this discussion, we'll set the foundation for the 4th archetype, the lover, in the episode that follows. So, subscribe so you don't miss it. Like the episode if you would. Pass it on to another man who might benefit from it. And leave a comment below. I'll see you next week. The forge is open.